ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਕੀ ਨਮਸਤੇ ਤੇ ਕੰਨੇ ਨਵੇਂ ਸਾਲ ਦੀਆਂ ਮਤੀਆਂ ਮਤੀਆਂ ਮੁਬਾਰਕਾਂ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸ ਪਰਤੀਏ ਜੁੜੇਦੇ हैं एंड आज साडा टॉपिक है सीड्स ऑफ टेररिज्म एंड फेलियर ऑफ लीडरशिप पार्ट 2 विद हरबंस सिंह संब्याल जी। नमस्कार सर।
Namaskar. Good evening to everyone in India and good morning to viewers in Europe and America. A happy new year. First of all, let's hope that 2021 is better than 2020. India has had a rough journey, so we are hopeful things will brighten up. So we are meeting after a little bit of gap. I'll briefly recall last time. I gave you an overview of the conditions of the world before terrorism struck the valley. How the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran, how the Kaaba at Makkah was taken over by the fundamentalist Islamists, how the Soviet Union invaded, how China embarked upon a new journey, bidding goodbye to the policies of Mao Zedong and embracing some of the policies of free market. England also, arrival of Margaret Thatcher, and the beginning of the free market. All these things impacted the whole of the world. And rarely is a single year so impactful in the history of mankind. For our purpose, the important thing was that Arabian money was pumped all over the world. Arabian clerics and Islamist scholars, they had spread out all over the world, particularly India. And a new kind of Islam was being propagated here. Wahhabi Islam, a very fundamental Islam, people committed to it were also committed to the life and times of Prophet Muhammad and therefore wanted everything to be replicated as it was during his times. Amongst all this, I will be saying a few things. People might differ and I'll welcome their point of view. I am of the firm opinion that much depends on the kind of leadership we have at a particular time in history in confronting new problems. In India, 1977 was again a watershed year. For the first time, Congress had been ousted. The strongest leader that India has produced, Indira Gandhi, she personally lost her election. But because of the incompetence and failure of the opposition parties, in 1980, she was back in power again. People had reposed faith in her and her policies. Now, this had made the opposition parties very desperate. After a great deal of trouble, they had succeeded in ousting Indira Gandhi, and now she was back again. So a new strategy was built by the opposition parties, and that was that instead of striking at the center, they focused on the states. Because a number of states, they were feeling restless. They had all states had different problems, and you cannot have one size that fits all. One solution that is a Ramban for everybody, that is just not possible. So very soon, a number of Indian states, they slipped out of Congress hands. We know in 1977, Sheikh Abdullah had broken away from the Congress and the National Conference had been reselected and it had won a resounding majority during that election. In Karnataka, Congress lost. In Tamil Nadu, Congress had already been ousted in 1967 and it was still out. In Kerala, the left government had been ousted. In fact, Congress had been ousted from there as well. And there was only two groups of left parties in both the camps. Tamil Nadu was out. Andhra also lost. That was a big blow to the Congress and Indira Gandhi personally. Andhra was supposed to be in the pocket of Indira Gandhi, but because of one false move by Rajiv Gandhi, that he had ill-treated the chief minister of that state, scolded him publicly, and N.T. Ramarao took advantage of that and he fought the election on the issue of Telugu Gauravam, the Telugu pride. So in Andhra it was this, in West Bengal again there was no Congress government. The leftist government led by Jyoti Basu was firmly in the saddle. Apart from this, 1980 was a very difficult decade for India. Regional forces had risen, communal elements were rising, Hindus were turning upon Muslims, Hindus and Muslims were turning upon Christians, and everybody was turning upon tribals. They were at the receiving end. In Assam, in a single massacre, 4,000 people were killed. There were communal riots in Maharashtra, in Uttar Pradesh, in Bihar, and in Gujarat. So that was becoming the norm. It appeared that India was breaking up. Now, Indira Gandhi, instead of looking inwards and finding a solution for all these problems, somehow it stuck that this was the doing of some outside power. Some superpower was trying to destabilize her and the country. And the fact that her younger son, Sanjay Gandhi, he had lost his life in a fatal air accident, that had also made her superstitious and suspicious. It was very difficult for her to trust other people. She had become so superstitious that for the first time she had started visiting number of Babas, the self-styled godmen. And in this, two developments, they were troubling her in the extreme. One was that Punjab too was slipping towards secessionism. Khalistani movement had already begun. There can be a debate that who is the real father of that movement, that did Congress create Sant Bhindranwale, and how everything proceeded, what was the role of various political parties. But that apart, the fact remains that Khalistani movement and secessionism that had come to stay in Punjab. In 1981, an Indian Airlines aircraft was hijacked and taken to Lahore from Chandigarh. This was one of those beginnings where the relationship between India and Pakistan started deteriorating at a very fast pace. Jammu and Kashmir, the problem of Jammu and Kashmir was, till now, Jammu and Kashmir and the Kashmiri Leadership National Conference, they had been firmly with Congress. Right from the British period, they had aligned themselves with the Congress. But in 1977, for the first time, National Conference realized that this country can be ruled by other parties also. And this is only one state and they are only one party, representing only a small state. So how do they maintain their interests? How do they safeguard their interests? So obviously the answer is that they have to build bridges with other political parties also. Janata Party had come to power, and that was a period when Sheikh Abdullah had a free hand. Central government did not interfere during that period. 78, 79, central leadership left all these states alone. But with the return of Indira Gandhi, it was very obvious that she is not going to allow the same kind of relationship. She will try to control. And then this personal element came that it was difficult for her to digest that national conference, which was propped by the Congress in 1975. Sheikh Abdullah was brought back by Indira Gandhi in 1975, was now turning away. With this fact in mind, she tried to control J&K. Now, how does a politician respond to this kind of a challenge? He responds in the only kind that he knows, and that is that he too raises a certain force which can throw some challenge. And J&K regional party could always throw the challenge of secessionism, autonomy. It had a number of arrows in its quiver. This is what they did. Now people say, particularly A.S. Dulat, a very seasoned hand of Kashmir, he keeps telling us that Sheikh Farooq Abdullah is a nationalist. But the fact is that there are times when he is a borderline case. In 1978, the Congress had accused Farooq Abdullah of being a member of the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front. This rumor was there. Many years later, he explained to Shujat Bukhari, now killed, the editor of one of the papers in Srinagar. In an interview, he told him that the fact is that there was a meeting in Muzaffarabad. He was present there, but he did not sign on the agreement reached at there. In other words, he says that he did not put his authority behind JKLF. He was not a member of the JKLF. He refused to be a member of JKLF. So one has to grant him that, and we must accept that what he said was right. He can be a nationalist. I'll grant even that also. He has made some great speeches, great contribution to the national cause. But because of political compulsions, and here comes the issue of leadership, both failed, the center as well as the state leadership. That instead of finding a civilized, amicable way of sorting out their problems, they were both using such methods which were destructive in the extreme. And what were the methods? The methods were that National Conference was using the card of secessionism, autonomy, and the center was arrogant in the knowledge that it has constitutional weapons in its hands, like, say, the office of the governor. This was a dangerous ploy, a very dangerous game. This period went on drifting like this. In 1981, National Conference decided that it should bring a bill back. The bill was known as, in short, the Resettlement Bill. The Resettlement Bill, the very fact that the purpose was to rehabilitate the descendants of those Muslim residents of Jammu who had migrated to Pakistan between March 1947 and April 1954. It's a long time. Their descendants in 1981 or 82, they could return back to the state and occupy their lands, which they had left here. And what were the realities? The realities were that no Kashmiri had migrated to that part of Kashmir which was occupied by Pakistan. Only those Muslims had migrated who were from Jammu, and they had migrated to Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Now, India had faced this problem earlier, in 1948-49. And at that early stage, it had been decided that those who have left for Pakistan, they cannot come back and reclaim their properties. So there were many Muslims, thousands of Muslims, particularly from Delhi, who had wanted to come back and were not allowed to come back. There were many more in Punjab also who wanted to come back, but none was allowed to come back. Now here in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah was planning in 1981 that the descendants of those people who had left for Pakistan between 1947 and 1954, they can come back and reclaim their lands. Now this was something which could not be digested by Jammu, because obviously it meant that it would create an imbalance of the demography. The demography in Kashmir, of course, is Muslim majority. And with all this population coming back to Jammu, Hindus would be losing their majority in Jammu also. This fear was very real. And still Sheikh Abdullah insisted upon this. And he also provoked the Dogras by saying that this is essential because Dogras were instrumental in large-scale massacre of Muslims, and therefore justice has to be done to them. And he never thought for a moment that justice also needs to be done to those who had migrated from Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and who were still waiting for allotment of land. So obviously, Sheikh Abdullah was making it very clear that he can be the Chief Minister of Jammu also, provided Jammu is only Muslim. He is not prepared to be the Chief Minister of Hindus. Now, this was a situation which pitched Congress against National Conference in a violent manner. It was a question of existence. In 1982, before the bill could be passed, it had been presented during Sheikh Abdullah's lifetime, but it could not be passed during his lifetime. Farooq Abdullah took over, and one of the first things that he did was that this bill was piloted through the Assembly and the Legislative Council. The governor sent it back for review, but the assemblies, the Assembly and the Council both, they again passed the bill and they sent it back to the governor for sending it to the President of India for assent. Now it reached President Zail Singh, and what did he do? He sent it to the Supreme Court for reference. And you'll be surprised that it remained there from 1983 onwards. The bill remained with the Supreme Court of India. It was only in 2001 that it was taken by the Supreme Court, and they returned it back to the president without answering the question. A presidential reference is that the president sends a bill to the Supreme Court asking whether it was legal or not, whether it was constitutional or not. But instead of answering that question, the Supreme Court sent it back without answering. It's your problem, it's your baby, you handle it the way you like it. That was the first time in our country when the Supreme Court had abdicated its authority and had refused to perform a constitutional duty. Anyway, that's a separate thing that after that, a number of times this has happened, but that was the first. In this atmosphere, in 1983, the elections were to be held for the assembly. Now, Indira Gandhi, it is believed in Delhi, it was a very, all political leaders used to talk about this, the relationship between Indira Gandhi and Farooq Abdullah. Farooq Abdullah kept telling everybody that he is the third son of Indira Gandhi. He was very obviously very close to the family and a part of the family rather. But he had his own political compulsions. Now Chandrasekhar, former Prime Minister and one of the leading figures of opposition party, he was of the opinion that though he says this, but the fact is that Farooq Abdullah is a number of things at number of times. He can be very pleasing, he can be very affable, winnable, and he can ditch you also at any time. That was his opinion. However, this relationship that went on. But during this period, what was happening was, at the national level, the opposition parties were getting together. All these states where non-Congress governments were there, as well as other political parties, regional political parties, they had come together, and the first opposition conclave was held in Vijayawada, Andhra Pradesh. N.T. Ramarao was the host. Soon thereafter, there was another conclave, and all these regional leaders, they gathered together to discuss their problems. Just as the run-up for the assembly was taking place, Farooq Abdullah had declared that he will be hosting in Srinagar the next conclave. So he held, during the campaigning, a conclave in Srinagar. Another was held in Calcutta. Now, the gist of all these meetings was that Center was thwarting the regional aspirations. Regions had certain aspirations which the center did not appreciate, did not understand, and therefore was trying to throttle the opposition voices, regional voices. So one of the main demands was that the relationship between governor, center, and the state should be revisited. That the state should have the authority, the power to send a panel of 3 names to the center. And from among those 3, the center can choose anyone as the governor of the state. Because what was happening was that the governor had become a spokesperson of the political party in Delhi. And that is something which is very dangerous for a political setup, a constitutional setup. In 1973, Akali Dal had passed a resolution, and it was called Anandpur Sahib resolution because their convention had taken place at Anandpur Sahib. Now, Anandpur Sahib, as you must be knowing, is a religious place, is a holy place for the Sikhs. So somehow, when the resolution came with the name of Anandpur Sahib resolution, most of the people in this country, they linked it with religious effort of the Sikhs, that they were trying to impose something upon the rest of the country, which was an affair of the Sikhs only. But the fact is that that resolution was Anandpur Sahib resolution because the convention had taken place at Anandpur Sahib. Now, one of the main demands of that resolution was that there should be greater decentralization of power, that there should be a genuine federal structure in the country, and that center should not be interfering unduly in the state of affairs. So with this kind of situation going on, there was suspicion in Delhi and there was frustration in the states. Delhi felt that there was some conspiracy going on. The states felt that Delhi was unnecessarily throttling us. So a confrontation was building up. Even in this situation, Indira Gandhi did her best to form an alliance with Farooq Abdullah. But for some reason, it could not be materialized. The result was that both the parties, they fought independently against each other. The result was that there was violence, there was fraud. Now, electoral violence, I am one of those people who believes that electoral fraud or violence does not take place just like that. When at any booth, both the parties are strong, they have strong presence, there is no fraud, because everybody knows that people will die. bogus voting takes place only when one of the party is very strong at a particular booth. It is then that it is able to hijack the whole booth and vote for a particular candidate. But this thing did happen. In the run-up to the elections, many Congress workers were killed in Anantnag, and at a number of places in the valley, there were accusations of fraudulent voting, booth capturing, etc., etc. The result was that National Conference did win. It won 46 seats out of 75. A lot many of them from the valley. Congress could win only 26 seats, but all these seats from Jammu. And 3 seats went to the independents. Now this is very significant because this voting pattern, it demonstrates one thing very clearly, a clear divide between Jammu and Kashmir. National Conference winning in the valley, Congress winning in the Jammu region. And I vividly recall that after the elections, I had visited Samba and I asked one of my friends what happened. And his response was that this was not an election, it was a plebiscite. That is Jammu going for the National Party and Kashmir going for the regional party, for autonomy, Jammu for unity. So this was 1983. However, there was one incident that stands out during this election. That incident was at Iqbal Park in Srinagar during the election rally of Indira Gandhi. The rally was disturbed by certain hooligans at the back of the crowd. They showed their private parts to Indira Gandhi, about 8 or 10 people there. Not very many people noticed, but anybody who's on the stage, he definitely noticed because he's looking at them. They are at the rear. So she must have noticed that. And according to B.K. Nehru, who was then governor at that time in J&K, he says that this was a breaking point between Indira Gandhi and Farooq Abdullah. That basically, and it's a fact, that basically Indira Gandhi was a very, very strong feminist. She just did not tolerate any affront to womanhood. And this insult was not only to her, it was an insult to all womanhood. And therefore, she was unable to forgive him. But B.K. Nehru says that the real reason was not only just this very obscene demonstration, but the real reason was he names 2 people, M.L. Fotedar and Mufti Muhammad Saeed. And the words which he uses is that these were petty-minded men serving their own interests. That they carried the tale to Indira Gandhi, that this was the doing of Farooq Abdullah. B.K. Nehru vehemently defends Farooq Abdullah, that he can do a number of things, but he can never, ever stoop so low as to instigate or ask some of his followers to do such an act, despicable act. So whatever the reason, the fact was that after that, Farooq Abdullah was a marked man. Indira Gandhi was bent upon throwing him out. She, whatever resistance was in her mind, was dispelled by another incident. That happened in 1984. Soon after India had won the World Cup in cricket, Kapil Dev's team had come back to the country, and the first series that India had to play was against West Indies. It's in 1983. And for some strange reason, Srinagar was allotted one of the one-day matches. When the teams arrived there, Gavaskar has given a very vivid description. Kapil Dev also has spoken a lot about that incident. What Gavaskar writes is that what happened to the Indian team during the match was not that they were shocked. They were left stunned. Stunned because here is a team that is a world champion coming back to the country and playing the first match as champions, being booed by the Indian crowd. This was something which was beyond their comprehension. I had seen that match on the television, and I recall very well that Sunil Gavaskar tried his best to win the crowd. Somebody from the crowd, he waved the poster of Imran Khan, and Gavaskar gave a thumbs up. So that section of the crowd was a little bit mollified that here is a gentleman cricketer who acknowledges the greatness of another fellow cricketer, even if he is a Pakistani. But in all, the experience was terrible. But Gavaskar still insists, he insists in his book that it was only a section of the crowd. But that section was so vociferous, so loud, throwing apples and other rubbish, even empty bottles at the players and the fielders, that it appeared that the whole of the stadium was against the Indian team. But anyway, we realized that it was the Indian team which was booed for no other reason except for being Indians. Now, this was not a new thing. In 1978, Srinagar was to host a Ranji Trophy match. The Jamaat-e-Islami had threatened to disrupt that match. And Farooq Abdullah, then president of the Cricket Association, he approached the President of India, sought their help, security forces, and the match was conducted peacefully. But one thing was different. In 1978, Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah was the chief minister, and he was at peace with the center. There was no clash, confrontation with the center in 1978. In 1983, when the West Indians came to play India in Srinagar, the chief minister of the state, Farooq Abdullah, was not at peace with center, he was at war. So it is possible because of this reason, there was some kind of encouragement for the troublemakers to create some trouble. But these were signs which were signals, very bad signals for the rest of the country. And I believe that that was the first time when India started becoming hostile towards Kashmiris. Now the hostility is total, but that was the beginning. You just cannot tolerate anyone who insults your own world champions. It's not every day that we are producing world champions. So this was 1983. Indira Gandhi started insisting upon Farooq Abdullah that he should take action against these elements, and that she was getting reports that these elements were also hobnobbing with the Khalistanis. Now remember, this was a period when Khalistani movement was becoming stronger. Violence in Punjab had begun to grow. Targeted killings had already started in Punjab. Here, the danger was that if anything happens to the valley, if secessionism becomes strong in the valley, it was going to have serious repercussions on other states. Assam was on the boil. Tamil Nadu, though the language issue had been sorted out and the threat of separation had decreased, yet the fact was that instead of the language issue, there was a new issue coming up in Tamil Nadu. That was the Tamil Elam. In Sri Lanka, the Tamil Tigers, they had already started making their presence felt. And there was an element in Tamil Nadu which wanted to align with the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka and create a separate homeland for Tamils by combining the northern Sri Lanka and Tamil Nadu. This was a serious issue. So if any state succeeds in giving the message that secessionism is possible, the repercussions for the rest of the country would be very, very serious. That Indira Gandhi knew. So she asked the governor B.K. Nehru to remove Chief Minister Farooq Abdullah. By his own admission, Mr. Nehru says that he refused. He warned her that this was not only unconstitutional, but it was also dangerous. So he advised her not to do that. The result was that soon thereafter, Mr. B.K. Nehru was removed, and in his place, Jagmohan was sent as governor. Now this was a great shift. Jagmohan in 1983, he was known for his role in the demolition of many places in Old Delhi. There is absolutely no doubt that those demolitions led to the beautification of the region. The Jama Masjid area was cleared, it was cluttered, and so were other places. The Red Fort was vacated of all the squatters who were there, and the place looked spacious, bigger, and beautiful. But there was a stigma attached to Jagmohan, that he was anti-Muslim. He arrived in J&K with this stigma of not being fair to the Muslims. At that point of time, I would say unfairly, he was accused of that. But because of his close association with Sanjay Gandhi, this stigma had remained with him. He manipulated after that. There was some problem in the National Conference government, there is no doubt about that. The problems had already begun when Sheikh Abdullah was alive. In 1978, it had become clear to many people that Sheikh Abdullah was trying to find a successor for himself from within his own family. So there were two candidates for the chief minister after his passing away. One was his son, Farooq Abdullah. But the problem with Farooq Abdullah, according to those who know at that point of time, was that he was immature and a little bit volatile. The other was Ghulam Muhammad Shah, popularly known as Gul Shah, the son-in-law of Sheikh Abdullah. He was considered to be very ambitious, unscrupulous, and corrupt. Finally, Sheikh Abdullah had zeroed in on Farooq Abdullah. But this was not appreciated by his oldest colleague, Mirza Afzal Beg. And Mirza Afzal Beg was expelled in 1978. So the problem within the party was there. During all these years, J&K had made huge strides in development. What he inherited was a massive structure, but a very, very soft state. A state in which the relationship between the government and the state institutions was that of a patron and a client. The bureaucracy, the police, the other constitutional bodies, they were convinced that their duty is to please the government, to do the bidding of the government. Now, when this happens, the biggest loser is the state. When institutions get weakened, be sure that we are in for a trouble then. Because if there is a crisis, those institutions will not be able to rise to the occasion. So this was the state which he had inherited. A little bit further, what happened was that Jagmohan exploited the division within the family. And Ghulam Muhammad Shah was encouraged. The result was that on 1st July 1984, Ghulam Muhammad Shah, along with 12 other members of the and the Legislative Council, plus the leader of the Congress party, Maulvi Iftikhar Hussain, they approached the governor at 10:30 in the night. And they told him that they are withdrawing the support to Farooq Abdullah's government. That they are also prepared to form an alternative government with the support of Congress. Congress gave in writing that if Ghulam Muhammad Shah is made the chief minister, they are willing to lend all the support. So that would give them a majority. And this was claimed at that point of time. In hindsight, I can say that at that moment, Jagmohan was not prepared. Probably he had been a little bit late in preparing for the actual coup. So he asked them to come in the morning at 8:30 a.m. This group insisted that it cannot be so, because we'll be killed, we'll be lynched. That when the moment this news leaks out, the men of hooligans of the streets, the police will be helping them, and our lives, our family's life, our property will be threatened. So kindly act right now. Governor again refused that I cannot do that right now. You come in the morning. But he preponed the time that instead of 8:30, he said you come at 7:30. Now these people said that kindly let us stay here because we cannot go outside. Am I audible? My video had stopped for a moment.
Yeah, but we can hear you right now.
Okay.
Ji.
So they insisted that they should be allowed to stay in the Raj Bhavan. Now Jagmohan says that in his book, My Frozen Turbulence, that they did not stay. Said that they had spent that night in the Raj Bhavan, the guest house of the Raj Bhavan. So whatever the truth, that does not greatly impact the fact. The fact was that in the morning, they delivered the letter, Jagmohan took action, and he called Farooq Abdullah, told him that you have lost your majority, you kindly resign. Now after that there are two versions. Jagmohan says, but since he has taken full care of recording this, something which was very unconstitutional doing of his, but he did record that I told Farooq Abdullah, and he said he advised me to impose governor's rule, and that I asked him to give that in writing. But Farooq Abdullah, what he gave in writing was that this is highly unconstitutional what you are doing or have done, that the proper place for judging the majority is the floor of the house. It cannot be judged in the Raj Bhavan. So kindly convene the assembly and there we'll test the strength. But Jagmohan dismissed him and Gul Shah was sworn in. Now Jagmohan has given a number of authorities. One is Mr. Morse, a British authority on constitution, and there is another authority, some lord something, I'm forgetting the name. Now both those are those people who were trying to stall the powers of the parliament. And in my book, I have given the whole reference in the book which is to come out, but I have added a comment that in 2019, the British Parliament was prorogued by the Queen on the recommendation of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, against the wishes of the Speaker, who is the Master of the House, and Supreme Court and the court there that adjudged that the prorogation was unconstitutional. But the Queen had accepted the advice of her Prime Minister. That is the parliamentary system. Whatever advice the Chief Minister or the Prime Minister gives, that must be heeded too. Jagmohan, he brought out this obsolete argument, and he dismissed Farooq Abdullah. Farooq Abdullah's advice that either the assembly should be convened or assembly should be dissolved was not adhered to. So this, in my opinion, was a watershed moment. The dismissal and the manner of dismissal of Farooq Abdullah. The government of Shah Gul remained in power from 84 to 86. And much of the time in the valley was spent under curfew. So much so that Kashmiris have a very strange kind of a humor. They can laugh even in the worst of situations. They had named Gul Shah as Curfew Shah. Such were the extended periods of curfew in the valley that the chief minister was called the Curfew Shah. So this is the background for what is going to happen next. The next landmark will be the beginning of individual targeting, killing of not only Pandits, but all those who stood for the Indian symbols. The election of 1987, which in fact utterly destroyed the democratic system in Jammu and Kashmir. We'll come to that the next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harbans sir, for another insightful session. We can't see you, but we can hear you right now. I would like to ask if anybody has any questions in the audience. This is the time to ask it. I don't seem there is any questions on today's session. So we look forward to having you all back next week when we will discuss this further in detail as Harbans sir told us. Thank you.
I have one, I have one question for Harbhajan Singh.
Yes, please.
Please.
A question, when you're talking about the bill, remember the bill you're talking about when the people from Jammu Kashmir went to Pakistan and they like to come back and the bill was withheld in the Supreme Court, yes?
Yes.
And that is given back to the president, yes?
Yes.
What happened to that bill until now?
It was sent back unanswered. Now, of course, everything has changed.
Okay.
Now it is inoperative.
Yeah, that's not implemented anymore.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nidhi. Any other questions before we end the session for today?
Yes, only one thing, there's so many things which I already know, but especially bills and after Jagmohan, the things happened, that was really very good, knowledgeable things to know.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you, everybody. And let's meet again next week and know more about the history of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.